Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and welcome back to the final episode of our Wang Yun mini-series, as we will now see why Wang Yun is the man who almost saved the Han, in this final part titled Dooming the Han. Now immediately after Dong Zhuo's death, Wang Yun, as the main architect of the assassination, naturally became the head of the court. While there were still many Dong Zhuo supporters at court, there were even more opposition, especially at the higher levels of government, since Dong Zhuo never managed to remove the gentry clan's hold on the imperial court. And while these officials might have stayed obedient or silent, much like Wang Yun, out of fear or self-preservation, now with Dong Zhuo's death, the intimidation factor vanished, and in the same night, government forces led by Huang Fusong besieged Dong Zhuo's fortress at Mei, where Dong Zhuo's entire clan was located. And with Dong Zhuo gone, many of the garrison forces surrendered without any resistance, as Dong Min, Dong Zhuo's younger brother, and Dong Huang, Dong Zhuo's nephew, both died defending the fortress. Then the rest of Dong Zhuo's clan were rounded up and executed soon after. The only surviving members of the clan were his son-in-law, Niu Fu, and daughter, as Niu Fu was stationed elsewhere at this time. But not long after, Lu Bu would send Li Su to attack Niu Fu, and after losing the battle, Niu Fu tried to run away, only to be betrayed by his own guards, Hu Che, as his death officially ended Dong Zhuo's line. And much like how the garrison at Mei Fortress surrendered, almost all of Dong Zhuo's officers surrendered to the government forces, as many troops chose to disband to return home to the Liang province for the time. And for at least that moment, it seemed that the Han had returned to a peaceful time, as Wang Yun also sent out official Zhang Zhong east to inform the warlords that took part in the original coalition against Dong Zhuo of the news. Yet life was not all rosy from this point on. Wang Yun took his success very poorly, as he started to become aloof to his fellow officials, as he saw himself as above them. Lu Bu, the man who had helped carry out his assassination, was also starting to get marginalized at court as a mere brute, or a tool used and now discarded. Even worse, Wang Yun became fixated on punishing Cai Yong for sighing upon hearing the news about Dong Zhuo's death. Now, Cai Yong, who was 4 years older than Wang Yun, and was already 60 at this time, was a renowned Confucian scholar, poet, musician, calligrapher, and most importantly, the court historian, who also happens to be the father of Cai Yan. He had famously been a victim of the first partisan incident and had been exiled from the courts for the past 12 years, before the eradication of the eunuchs and Dong Zhuo's rise to power gave him the chance to return to the court to resume his role as the court historian to continue to write the history of the Eastern Han Dynasty. So in a sense, Dong Zhuo's rise gave Cai Yong a second chance at his life work, much like Wang Yun himself. But because Cai Yong had expressed his gratitude by sighing in front of Wang Yun had him imprisoned. And while awaiting his sentence, Cai Yong wrote an apology letter to Wang Yun and offered to take the punishment of tattooing a black mark on his forehead, symbolizing that he is a criminal, and also slicing both of his feet off, just so that he can be spared from death, as he wanted to live a few more years to complete his life work, the history of the Eastern Han, which is a project he's been working on since joining the court as the court historian. And this is a callback to the Western Han scholar Sima Qian, who was also a court historian sentenced to death, but in order to be spared so that he may survive and finish the records of the Han, Sima Qian opted to be castrated so that he would be allowed to live on as a eunuch. And with this precedent, all the scholars at court pleaded with Wang Yun to spare Cai Yong. But Wang Yun insisted that Cai Yong's principles were misaligned as no righteous scholar could grieve for someone like Dong Zhuo. So leaving him alive to continue to write the history of the Eastern Han would cause a mistake for future generations. And thus, Cai Yun was left to rot in jail, where he would eventually die not long after, at the age of 60. And with Cai Yun's death, Wang Yun's popularity evaporated overnight, as the court had turned against him. And to make matters worse, the death of Cai Yun convinced Dong Zhuo's former officers that Wang Yun would never spare them for having served in Dong Zhuo's army in the past, as if he was unwilling to spare a renowned scholar, with the entire court pleading for mercy, for merely sighing to express grief for Dong Zhuo's passing, then how could he ever spare them for having taken part in Dong Zhuo's past crimes? Thus, when Wang Yun started to waver on the decision of how to deal with Dong Zhuo's former troops, especially after rejecting Lu Bu's initial proposal to use Dong Zhuo's personal treasury to buy the loyalties of Dong Zhuo's former troops, many of these troops who had now long fled home in the Liang province started to fear for their lives. Rumors coming out of Chang'an became more and more outrageous as it shifted from the disbandment of all the former troops to killing all the former troops to killing all the troops and their families in the Liang province. Now, of course, none of these rumors were true, as Wang Yun never considered executing the former troops, but because of his indecisiveness on the matter, coinciding with Cai Yun's death, many of Dong Zhuo's officers, namely Li Jue and Guo Si, started to gather their former troops as they made plans to flee farther west. Yet after consulting with Jia Xu, who became the brains of the former officers of Liang, they decided that rather than running away, they would be better off attacking Chang'an. As Jia Xu put it, if they win, then they win the world, and if they lose, they can always loot the nearby wealthy villages to gain enough loot for a more comfortable life in a land far, far away out west. Now, as we already discussed this before in our Lu Bu lore series, the government forces sent to stop this rebellion ended up soundly defeated outside of Chang'an, with former officer Xu Rong dying in battle, while Hu Zhen's forces ended up surrendering to the rebels, which only emboldened them as their ranks swelled to number over 100,000 strong, as Chang'an was put under siege. Then after 8 days of valiant defense by Lu Bu, the city fell as troops inside turned on Lu Bu and opened the city gates. And while Lu Bu would fight his way out of the city and escape, Wang Yun refused to leave, as he decided to stay by the emperor's side till the very end, as he knew that this was his mistake and that he now needed to pay the price. And very soon after, he was captured by Li Jue, and Wang Yun, alongside his 3 sons, and many of his clan members would be executed. But fortunately, his 2 nephews, Wang Chen and Wang Ling, alongside his grandson, Wang Hei, would escape back to Taiyuan, where they would wait until they would be able to rejoin the imperial court after Cao Cao had reclaimed the emperor. And thankfully, at that point, the emperor still viewed Wang Yun as his savior, as his grandson, Wang Hei, would be given a second marquis title, while Wang Ling would rise all the way in the Wei court to the position of Grand Commandant. And of course, for those who knows, Wang Ling's line would eventually end during Sima Yi's coup, as he decided to remain a loyalist to the Wei court. But despite these executions of certain branches of the Wang clan and their faults, Wang Yun's contribution to his clan cannot be understated, as the Wang clan of Taiyuan would end up viewing Wang Yun as the start of their ascension for the next 500 years. As in the next 500 years, including Wang Yun himself, who was the Grand Excellency of the masses for the Han court, there would be 1 Grand Commandant, 2 Grand Excellencies of masses, and 3 Grand Excellency of the works. that would come from the Wang clan of Taiyuan. There would also be 3 empresses during the Eastern Jin dynasty alone that would come from their clan, and 3 more members of their clan would go on to marry princesses, and a whopping 12 members would go on to become prime ministers, stretching from the Eastern Jin dynasty all the way to the Tang dynasty. Overall, the Wang clan of Taiyuan is often viewed as one of the 4 most powerful gentry clans of the Wei Jin period, and even as late as the Tang dynasty, it was still viewed as one of the 7 most powerful clans in the land, and it would all trace back to Wang Yun, the man who almost saved the Han. And that will conclude our series here, as we'll return next week with another special mini episode where I will cover taxation and conscription requirements of the Han and Three Kingdoms period, before moving on to the much anticipated life of Cao Pi, where we will explore the life of the founder of the dynasty of Wei, as we go from his birth to his fight for becoming heir, all the way to his usurpation of the Han. So hopefully you all enjoyed the series, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!